Well, without further ado then, as promised at the very end of class, we had just finished defining mutualism and commensalism, right? So remember, mutualism is a relationship where both of our organisms are benefiting, right? Net benefiting. And we do want to keep in the back of our mind, and this will become important, that there's always a cost to some relationship, but the key is whatever you're getting out of it is more, okay, or better. Okay, and then commensalism, okay, is this idea where one organism is benefiting, okay, getting something out of that relationship, okay, and the other organism is getting nothing. Okay, it's unchanged or unfazed by what's happening here. So we went over a couple of examples, and I left off on this so you would have it as a reference. So we kind of like hit it really fast at the end of class. So if you wanted to start your project over the weekend, you would, and wanted to do a mutualism, you'd have some idea of what kinds of things you could think about. So for our mutualisms, we talked about the fungi and plants, mycorrhizae. Is what that fungi is, but there's a whole bunch of different ones. Leafcutter ants, for example, are a good one, right? They literally are gardening, right? So we have the ants that cut up the plant material. Sucks to be plant material. Okay, but the idea is they're feeding the fungi this food and helping the fungi grow. And then as a trade-off, right, they're providing the ants with a nutrient source. And for commensalism, remember the idea here, and the insect hunters and large mammals was the one I provided in class. Okay, the large mammals are kicking up all those insects, right? We said like a rhinoceros, right, walking through the tall grass. The birds are swooping through and eating the insects, so the birds are benefiting, but like the rhinoceros could care less / doesn't notice. Okay, bacteria in human skin is another one. And 90% of the time, of course, we know there are exceptions to this, right? But most of the bacteria in your skin, you don't even know it's there. It's living its best life. It's getting a ton of benefit by living on you, right? Space, habitat, food, protection, all sorts of stuff, but it's just there, right? Living its best life. Okay? And so for minor examples where that can cause some damage to you, if you're cut in a very specific way, nothing seems to matter, right? Okay, these two separate sets, very clear, and the examples within very helpful. Does this feel good? I just wanted to make sure that we got to back up and actually talk about it. Hey, ending class on a slide. Okay, so let's talk about the strength of these interactions. Okay, so obligate versus facultative. Okay. So some of these interactions, and this is the first time we really see this, where these interactions are very specific and what we call obligate. Okay, meaning that these organisms are linked together in their life history. Okay, so they have very specific traits, and they need each other to survive. So we might imagine like a very long trumpet flower. Okay, if we've seen these in the jungles. Okay, so there's these really, really, really long flowers that have very long trumpets, right? And all of the nectar and pollen, it's actually inside the bell, but my drawing skills could use work. They are way, way at the bottom here. Okay, so when we think about this sort of scenario, like not everything can get up in that, right? The bell is often too narrow even for things like bees and hummingbirds to get in there. So what you need is a very specific organism, right? A very specific match for you. And most of these trumpet flowers either have birds or bats, right, that have evolved very specific mouth and tongues that fit these bells perfectly. Okay, so it's an exclusive club, right? We're not Tinder dating anymore. Okay, so it's a very one-on-one relationship. This bird has a very specific shaped beak that's only going to fit all the way down that trumpet. Now that beak could get in other flowers, but it becomes unwieldy and sort of ridiculous. So this is really a one-to-one relationship. The only way this flower is going to get pollinated, at least most of the time, is with this bird. And the only way this bird is going to feed easily and successfully is with this flower. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about obligates. Okay, we have very unique features. Now, of course, this is a very extreme example. Okay. The other example I have on here are figs and fig wasps. If you're not familiar with how figs and wasps reproduce, I enjoy now knowing. Okay. We have our fig, which is a round fruit, with a little flower on top. So as our wasps fly around looking for the perfect fig, right, we're pollinating the flowers. It's clearly a wasp. Doesn't get better. Okay. The key, of course, is that the goal here is for the fig wasp to oviposit, depositing my eggs. Some species actually climb in. Right? I'm putting my eggs inside the fig so they're protected. And as I fly around, I'm pollinating. That's when I'm providing them. And of course, what I'm getting back is protected, happy eggs. So that's the thing you know now. Do enjoy that. Okay. So they're both getting a reproductive benefit. Nothing else really pollinates figs, and fig wasps are unable to lay their eggs anywhere else. So it's a very tight, obligate relationship. This is not the worst wasp I could have drawn, let's be honest. More convincing, less convincing. Moving on. Okay, any questions about what the idea behind this is? Okay. Now on the flip side, right, so obligative meaning I am obligated to you. Right, it's like a contract. Now on the other side, okay, we can be facultative. Nope, rude. Why don't you usually do that in here? Okay, where the relationship is sort of casual. Is the Tinder of mutualisms. And this is usually what we see with most of our other relationships. Like they meet up, okay, but they're not the only other relationship that they have. Okay, so there may be some signs of coevolution, some clear signs of working together, but it's not going to be as strong. So if we think about like the trumpet flower and the beak, like those were very clearly tightly matched. Okay, with the fig wasp and the figs, okay, the length of that ovipositor, okay, and the thickness of that fig are like perfectly matched. Okay, for these sorts of things, you may see stuff that goes together, right? Fuzzy legs on bees and fuzzy pollen carts on flowers. Okay, so those things clearly work together, but it's not a one-to-one shape action, right? So this is what we mean by facultative, okay? There's multiple relationships involved. Okay, so what's facultative, we recognize that there is some kind of benefit. So they work together when they can or when given the opportunity. Okay, but it really is like using Tinder or any of those sorts of apps, right? A lot of individuals just use them to have lots of different relationships. There's nothing wrong with that. Live your life. Is Tinder even a popular one now? I don't know, man. It's like come and gone since I've been around. I'm going to run with it for now. All right, so this is casual dating. So we're going to think the less committed your relationship, right? So the more casual it is, right? The less tight or the less obvious these evolutionary paired adaptations are going to be, right? Because you want an adaptation that's going to allow you to work in all relationships, not just the one now. Now, in any case, and now what we do know is that generally speaking, positive interactions are positive, right? So unlike when we were looking at competition, when we took away neighbors, how we saw an increase in performance and a variety of metrics. Okay. In this case, right, we see the opposite. Since we're getting some kind of benefit from hanging out, whatever it is, you're providing me nutrients, you're providing me protection, I'm providing you a shelter, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we see an increase in performance when we're together. Okay, so when we're close to our neighbors. So we're going to see the opposite trends that we saw when we were viewing competition. And the graphic should look kind of the opposite. So let's take a peek. All right, so here we have kind of a big graphic. Okay, but ultimately it doesn't tell us a whole lot more than what some of our smaller graphics were telling us. So let's take a minute to sort of absorb all of the information that's being given us. Clearly I've gotten tired. It's just graph question mark now. So there's a lot in this graphic. Okay, so they're giving us a lot of different locations. Okay, so we're trying to decide, is this the same everywhere? So let's just look at one. I'm going to look at this bottom one. So we can just focus on one thing. Just look at this one here. It has more or less the same trends as kind of most of them. Okay, so let's start with our x-axis. Okay, what is our independent variable? Low versus high elevation, good. So we're really talking about being like at the bottom of a mountain range to being at like the top of a mountain range, right? So literally think elevation in the way we've been talking about it. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what they're doing, but that's a good way to kind of visualize this, right? Low elevation, right? Sort of being at sea level, right? Or like the bottom of a mountain range, or the bottom of a mountain. Okay, high elevation being very high up, so let's think about being at like the top of a mountain. Okay, being very high elevated. We all can kind of like picture those two locations. Even if we haven't been, we kind of imagine that. It's a good visual, right? Okay, how about our dv? What's our dependent variable, our y-axis? Our neighbor effect. Okay, so this is a little confusing the way they're talking about it, but the basic key is, okay, what is the net effect of a neighbor? Okay, so if it's blue, there's a positive effect of it hanging out, and if it's red, there's a negative effect of hanging out. Okay. Now, there is a little bit of a variation on a theme what we see here, but for the most part, the trend we see in the graph that I circled is overall the trend we're seeing in most of these. So what is this graph telling me?
And the higher elevation, the species really better whenever they have a neighbor.
Okay, so let's start there. So when we're in a high elevation, we're seeing a benefit. And remember, our benefits are like we're a plant, so more biomass, for example, of growing together. Why might that be? Perhaps, yeah, sure. So maybe they're helping turn over nutrients. Okay, what's it like at, say, a high elevation? There's a lot of harsh sunlight. Has anybody ever been up at the top of a mountain? It's kind of cold. Right, it's not lush like it is down here. Right, it's very rocky, barren. Right, if you get high enough, you get above right, the idea of tree line. The oxygen levels change, as Salam mentioned. The nutrient levels tend to change. It's a lot less. There's a much harsher environment. You tend to have to be specialized to hack it up there. Okay? So as we look at being up here, and when things are tough, there's a benefit of banding together. Okay, maybe they're helping turn over nutrients, maybe they're protecting each other from the sunlight or some of the harsher conditions. It's hard to say. Maybe it's a couple of things. Okay, but whatever it is, when things are really hard, it pays to band together. That's what we're seeing here. You can get on a bus, right? It's kind of intuitive. You already know mutualisms are a good thing. But what's going on here? Yeah, so when we're in the low elevation, so saying below the mountain maybe, or maybe down by sea level, we're seeing this mutualism switch to a negative impact. Okay, maybe something like competition. Why might this be?
They might be competing for resources, like trade for some.
Right, so now that we're off the top of the mountain, or our high elevation, things aren't so tough. Right, there are probably resources now. Okay, there's nutrients. There's sun that's not going to kill you in 2 seconds. Okay. So instead of having to band together to survive something ridiculous, okay, you can probably hack it on your own. So now having someone on top of you that was creating shade maybe before is now someone that's just on top of you. So we've crossed over that threshold from what cost having someone on top of you and you were getting that benefit of the shade is now just the cost of having someone on top of you because there's shade down here. Okay, so when you're in a space where things are easier, you're losing some of that benefit here, and now the cost of competition is higher. So we're not getting as much benefit, and now they're just in your face, eating the same foods, whatevering. Okay, so when we're in spaces that are easier to live in, mutualism isn't as beneficial. And what was that graph missing? Error bars. There's going to be graph pros when this is over. These have already gotten a lot easier though, right? You guys have gotten really good at this. We go through this too fast? Just okay? You guys actually nailed like all of these main points, so. All right, let's look at another one. We don't get to do a lot of line graphs, so let's look at a line graph instead. Okay, so note that my dV is the same, right? So I'm still doing RNE, right, which is that net neighbor effect. My handwriting is atrocious today, I apologize. All right, what's my take-home message for this graphic? Okay, let's break it down a little bit more. What's my IV here, my independent variable? Right, my summer temperatures, right? This is in degrees Celsius. Okay, so 25 degrees is quite hot. Right, this is almost body, about 10 degrees shy of body temperature or so. And this is quite cold, right? This is my barren Maine wasteland here, right? So we have quite warm, what we'd expect summer to be, and then quite cold. So given that, okay, and we're talking about plants, right? What kinds of things can we start to infer here? So what happens to plants when it's really cold? Why did we think Maine was such a barren wasteland? We can't give it up now, right? We have to commit all the way to the end of the semester.
Stuff down, cold.
Stuff goes dormant. It doesn't. You are committed, right? So things tend to go dormant in the winter when it's very cold. It's difficult for them to continue to grow and photosynthesize. So this is hard for them. There's no growth. Conversely, when it's warm, what do we see? It's November and still 80. So, right, you tend to still get that lush commitment to growth. Yep. Growth and reproduction, right? Okay, so knowing how plants can normally respond to temperature, what's going on with our graphic here? Right, so the warmer it gets, okay, the less of positive effect we're going to get, or the more negative of an effect we're going to get from our neighbor. Okay, and for the same reason we saw in this last graphic, right? When it's cold, okay, plants are already struggling. It's a wasteland. So anything, any benefit that they can get, okay, that can help increase their nutrients, prevent their tissues from freezing, protect them from deer that are going to rip off their bark, whatever it is, okay, this is going to be good for them because they're already sort of in survival mode, or at least any kind of somatic growth that they're getting during this time is strongly reduced. So anything that's going to help boost that's going to be a huge benefit. Right? And we're not getting really any reproduction when it's this cold. But as we get over into the warmer phase, okay, this is a time period where they would normally be fine. Right? There's sunshine and warmth. There's a lot of nutrients going in here. They already are in the positive growth and it can invest in reproduction. So now by having individuals in their face, they're competing for these resources. And so this is going to reduce their ability, right, to continuously invest in reproduction because there's someone in your face sharing your nitrogen. All right, so again, we see when times are tough, it's great to have help. Okay, but when things are good, hey, then you're just a mooch in my face. This is a line graph. What's this graph missing? An R squared. Okay, you need to tell me how tight of a fit that line is to those points. Good. Excellent. I suspect that that is probably pretty low. right, any questions on how we've interpreted our line graph? We don't get an opportunity to play with those very much. In case you're curious, that's the plant we were playing with this whole time. Okay, so as we can see, really, one of the big take-home messages is mutualism works to a benefit, and that's not surprising, but it's really delicate, right? It can cross this threshold of being competition fairly easily, right, when they start to lose their net benefit, right? Because all relationships have a cost. And so that's one of the things we want to talk about next. Okay, is how do we maintain this balance? And more interestingly, what happens when organisms don't? Okay, so really, we've been talking about this so far, what makes a good relationship go bad? Okay, so there are lots of different types of mutualisms or relationships. And so in this case, we're going to categorize them by the type of benefit that's being passed around. Okay, so for example, the first one is called a trophic mutualism. Right, we're going to think about like our trophic chains: secondary consumer, primary consumer, right? Primary producer. So this is any kind of relationship, okay, where you're providing energy, okay, or nutrients. So here we can see a nice consistent use of terms. And then we have habitat mutualisms. Okay, when we have at least one partner providing some kind of habitat, and this can be shelter or living space. Conversely, you can have one of the partners be altering the habitat in a way that makes it more livable. Okay, so the bacteria living on your skin, okay, you are their habitat, right? Okay, so anytime that your body is serving as a habitat, okay, unless you're giving them nutrients. There's lots of instances like the one I provided here, where burrows or caves or trees or nests are shared. Okay, keeping in mind it has to be voluntary. Okay, so we have exchange of food, we have exchange of housing. Okay, the key when we think about this, and these are the two biggest ones, and remember we've been keeping this in the back of our mind. Okay, with any relationship, while ideally if you're in it, right, you're incurring some kind of benefit, there is a cost. Okay, so if we think about these two major groups that we've just been talking about, a big part of that cost is providing either that food or that space, right? If I'm the shrimp from the last example, I have to go to that effort to dig out that burrow. And if I'm making it for not just myself, right, I have to make it twice as large and for a shape that is not my own. Okay, it's possible that I'm also keeping clean that house, so I may have to deal with another organism's fecal matter. Okay, so that's all a cost. This idea of providing a reward for a service, right? So trying to entice an organism to come to you. That may be food. Sometimes we see with like oxpeckers. So it's a type of bird that eats parasites off of like rhinoceri. Okay? So the mutualism there is they're eating the parasites, which is good for the rhinoceros, and that's food for the oxpecker, but the oxpecker likes more than parasites. So their reward and the cost to the rhinoceros is oxpecker usually takes a little bit of blood too. So they'll peck a sore spot on the rhinoceros and take a blood meal as well. That's a cost. Not ideal. Not ideal for the rhinoceros. But it's not a big enough cost to not get your parasites cleaned. Okay, and the key here, and this is something we want to keep remembering, is for this to be a mutualism, your benefits have to exceed the cost for both of you. There's no point. Any relationship, right? It's got to be worth it. Okay, so here's another reward system. So if you're not familiar with tree hoppers, that ugly guy there, body shame him. Okay, ants tend to protect tree hoppers. Tree hoppers are kind of useless. They don't have any like biting mouth parts or any of that business, no stinging bits. So they recruit an army of ants to protect them. And the way they do this is they secrete honeydew. Heard this phrase before, it's a stretch. Okay, they basically secrete sugar out of their butt. Okay, the ants drink it. It's a high energy solution. Right, so this is the reward. Okay, ants get to feed on this, so as long as the tree hoppers keep secreting it, they get to keep their army. Okay, but let's start thinking about this serving your own interest piece. Okay, tree hoppers always secrete the solution. Ants are always there to protect them. But does this continue to be beneficial if there aren't a lot of predators around? Right? I've maintained an enormous army. This is very expensive. Right? That's sugar solution is energy I'm not putting into my own body. When is it not worth it to do that anymore? Okay, I could instead not produce sugar solution, make myself bigger, okay, have more babies at the cost of not having an army. But if there aren't any predators, doesn't matter. Okay, so this is the weight. It's my risk. So here's how we can shift. Okay. So it's only a mutualism if both of us are doing our share. Okay. If I stop feeding the ants and the ants stick around, that's a commensalism. or if I'm feeding the ants and they don't help. Okay, but more commonly, if we think of something like parasitism, right, I can be feeding the ants and the ants are taking too much, right, and there aren't any predators. So it can have a negative effect on my tree hopper population. Right, they're eating all that sugar substance, and as I said, that's energy I could be putting into myself. I'm growing less, I'm reproducing less, and if I'm not getting enough protection, or I'm still having negative population growth, that stops being worth it. This eventually, if we think about this parasitism situation, falls into something that's literally called cheating, which is why I've kind of been making light of using the term relationships, right? So cheaters are one pair of a mutualistic relationship that take advantage of their partners. So we overexploit our partner's resources So, for example, perhaps I drink the sugar solution and I never have to protect them. So my ant colony blossoms to enormous proportions. Okay, I overeat, right? Always run them dry. Right, so I'm overexploiting them. They're having negative responses. I'm having an extreme positive response. So I'm cheating. I'm not fulfilling my half of the bargain at their cost. Most of the time, this doesn't last, as you might imagine. Like any relationship, this is going to break up. So we want to think about what then happens if you end up with a cheater in an obligate relationship. In other words, you're abusing me, but we need each other to live, like our fig and fig wasps. Right, so you're laying your eggs inside my fig, but you're not actively pollinating me. Okay, so in this case, we have penalties. And most of the time, penalties hurt both organisms, but hurt the cheater more. So if we think about our fig moths, or I have this example with the yuccas, which is another type of fruit. So if my fig wasp has laid eggs in a fig and is refusing or cheating on pollinating, the fig may kill itself, rot. Okay, so in this way, we've lost one fig, but we've lost an entire batch of fig wasp eggs, right? So we've punished, okay, that fig wasp for cheating. Okay, so the cost then to that fig wasp is very high and can keep them from doing it again. You also see this, so here we have the flowers being aborted again for putting too many eggs on one plant. You can see a reduction in nectar. I'm going to ration your food. Okay, any of these sorts of things, right, to make the cheater pay for what they've done until they choose to behave again. Because we need each other, so we can't break up. So we just need them to behave again is the key here. Okay, certainly I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. So once that feels good, we're all done, right? This is the very last thing that's going to be on the test, of course, with the exception of that journal club, which is just a review of many of the topics that we've been doing.